Good afternoon, students. Thank you for joining me today. We are going to be looking at the Grade 4 Performance Task for Language Arts, June 2022. The paper lasts for 1 hour, 30 minutes. Let's get to the task at hand. All right, so the general instruction says that this paper has two sources. Source 1 is a poster. Source 2 is an article. You're going to read both sources carefully and use them to answer the questions in Part 1A and Part 1B, as well as to write your letter in Part 2. All right, so the first source, let's make it a little smaller so we can see it all at once. It says, protect yourself and your family from mosquito-borne diseases. All right, they have dengue, chikungunya, CHIKV, and Zika. Okay, and it says you can get mosquito-borne diseases from the bite of an infected mosquito. So prevent mosquito bites. You're to sleep under bed nets, reduce breeding sites, cover water storage containers properly, keep mosquitoes out, use screens on windows and doors. Okay, let me make it a bit bigger so you can see the information for yourself. Okay. All right, so let's get to source 2. All right, so let's look at this passage, this article, dengue awareness. All right. So it says, dengue fever is a mosquito-borne disease that may cause a person to get a fever, headache, joint, and muscle pains. Here is what you should do if you get dengue. Get plenty rest and drink lots of water or juice. If you develop a fever, take Panadol, Cetamol, or other similar medication. The Ministry of Health and Wellness says that aspirin should not be taken, as this will make it worse. At present, the only way to prevent and control the spread of dengue is to destroy the mosquitoes that pass on the disease. The following are some tips on how you can do that. 1, do not keep old drums, used tires, plastic containers in your surroundings. 2, cover sleeping area with mosquito netting. 3, avoid mosquito bites even during the day. 4, wear long sleeve shirts and long pants outdoor. 5, use mosquito repellent on skin and clothing. And 6, change water in animal and pet containers regularly. Okay, so those are the two sources. We will now look at the questions. All right, so in part 1, it says, this part has 2 questions. You're to read each question carefully, then answer both questions. So question 1 says, which source is mainly about how to treat fever caused by dengue? And then question 2 says, which source is about different diseases we can get from mosquitoes? All right, so we have read both questions. Let's look now at the sources. Let's go back to question 1. Question 1 says, which source is mainly about how to treat fever caused by dengue? All right, so let's look at the sources. This one, pretty much the heading says dengue awareness, and of course it talks about the fever and what you should do. Take Panadol and Cetamol or other similar medication. But just let's look quickly to see what's in source 1, and it does not have anything specific that tells us about how to treat dengue. So we're going to go with source 2. All right, so source 2. So we can have source 2 is mainly, so we're just writing this in a sentence, it's mainly about how to treat fever caused by dengue. Okay, so that we would have for our first question. All right, question 2. Which source is about different diseases we can get from mosquitoes? So, of course, we just looked at source 2. It was mainly about dengue. All right, talking about dengue, how to treat dengue and how to prevent it. So, let's look at source 1. And source 1 talks about the different mosquito-borne diseases. So, we're going to go with source 1 for question 2. All right, so question 2 would be source 1 is about different diseases we can get from mosquitoes. Okay, that's it. So quite easy so far. Now let's look at part 1B. All right, so this says this part has 3 questions. You're going to read each question carefully, then answer them. Okay, so mosquitoes are harmful to human beings. Which source or sources supports the statement in the box below? And of course, without even going back, but just to check, right, we would see that both sources spoke about mosquitoes being harmful. So of course, in source 1, they talk about dengue and what it can, the disease, that it's a disease that, comes from mosquitoes that you could get from a mosquito and what it does. And then, of course, it tells us to protect yourself from these diseases. And of course, they list them there. So I'm going to say both sources. All right, so both sources support the statement in the box. We don't have to rewrite what the statement is in the box, but we say both, okay? And then we go to the next question, question 4. Why is the Ministry of Health and Wellness saying that we should not use aspirin to treat fever that comes from dengue? All right, so let's go to where we saw that information. All right, so in source 2, it says if you develop a fever, take Panadol, Cetamol, or other similar medication. The Ministry of Health and Wellness, let me highlight that section. All right, so here is where we would find the information. All right, the Ministry of Health and Wellness says that aspirin should not be taken as this will make it worse. Okay, so that's pretty much what we have to write in the space provided, that we should not take it because it will make the fever worse. Okay, so we pretty much sticking to what we see in the article. Okay, we don't need to add anything more to that. Just write what we see there. Okay, so I'm gonna just write we should not use aspirin to treat fever that comes from dengue, as this will make the fever. Let me put this on in the other section. This will make the fever worse. Okay. You could have written out, the Ministry of Health and Wellness says we should not treat because, okay? Because there's enough space here for you to do all of that. And of course, when you're writing, you can write in your own words. You don't necessarily have to use the words that I use. But pretty much that's the information that we would need to put in. Now, in question 5, it says, give 2 ways, one from each source, that you can reduce mosquito breeding sites. Okay, so we're going to look specifically at what is said about the mosquito breeding sites and how we can reduce that. So let's go to source one first. How can we reduce the breeding sites? Go back to source one. All right, so it says right here. All right, so right here it talks about reduce breeding sites. So what are we supposed to do? Cover water storage containers properly. Okay, so it's pretty much very explicit right here. And then let's go to the source 2. All right, how can we reduce breeding sites? And we can do that. Of course, breeding, they want water, okay? So we need to, of course, do not keep old drums and tires. That's how we can reduce the breeding sites because, of course, those things collect water. And, of course, changing water in the pets. All right, so this is another option here. Change water in animal and pet containers regularly because, of course, wherever there's water, there's a potential breeding site. All right, so they said one from source 1 and one from source 2, so we could have chosen either of these. So I'm going to go ahead and write in my answers that I have selected for question 5. All right, so for source 1, so I'm going to say according to source 1, we can reduce mosquito breeding sites by covering water storage containers all right, let me take this down to the other line. So we can reduce mosquito breeding sites by, what am I typing here? By covering water storage containers properly. That's what source 1 says. And then we go to the next part that talks about source 2. And so for source 2, so according to source 2, we can reduce mosquito breeding sites by not keeping old drums, used tires, and plastic containers in our surroundings. Okay, so that's it for question 5. Let's see what's next. Part 2, okay? So it says, read the task below and the information about what to include in your letter and then begin your work. So we have a letter to write. It says, write a letter to the principal of your school explaining 3 things that students can do at school to avoid getting dengue. Your letter must include evidence from source 1 and source 2. When you write your letter, remember to stay on the topic. Use details from source 1 and source 2 to support your explanation. Give details from the sources in your own words. Follow rules of writing, spelling, punctuation, and grammar usage. Okay, so we are going to be writing a letter, that much we know. Who are we writing a letter to? The principal of our school. What are we doing? We're explaining 3 things that students can do at school to avoid getting dengue. And of course, we must include evidence from source 1 and source 2. But when we are getting the evidence from source 1 and source 2, it says to give the details from the sources in your own words. So whereas in the previous question, I pretty much simply wrote back what was said in the sources above. When we're writing our letter, we have to rewrite, okay? Put it in our own words. Do not take it exactly from the document. So let's go look at source 1 and source 2 to see what evidence we can get from those that's relevant to what students can do at school to avoid getting dengue. Okay, so let me go back to source 1 and 2. What's in source 1 that students can do at school? All right. So prevent mosquito bites by sleeping under bed nets, reduce breeding sites, cover water storage containers properly, keep mosquitoes out, use screens on windows and doors. So from source 1, we have 2 options, I think. All right, let me highlight my options here. Let me use a different color. So we're going to be using green to highlight what we have found. All right, so we can reduce breeding sites at schools, okay? So I'm going to take that one. That's something that we can do at school. Sleeping under bed nets would not apply to school because, of course, that would be something done at home. It says use screens on windows and doors. This is another option. This is something that can be done at school. We have windows and doors. For me, though, it's not necessarily one of the best solution because remember, students are not always in classes. So yes, we will have the screens on doors and windows, but students often go out to choose this and make it work for you. This is another option because of course it would in the long run help as well to prevent mosquito bites or have the mosquitoes stay out. Okay, so that's something I just always like to do a little bit more analysis of the questions. But at your stage, if you said, okay, put screens on the windows and doors, that is perfectly fine. All right, we don't have to get too deep with it. All right, so then in source 2, it talks about do not keep old drums, old tires, and plastic containers in your surrounding. That is something we can talk about for school. It says cover sleeping area with mosquito netting. Again, school is for learning and play, and so this has nothing to do with sleeping area. We don't necessarily sleep at school. Okay, so that would not be ideal as a good source or evidence from this source for something to be done. Yes, of course, wherever you are, and especially since you spend so much time at school during the day, then you could talk about avoiding mosquito bites. All right, but again, you probably have to suggest ways to avoid these mosquito bites. All right, it says wear long sleeve shirts and long pants outdoor. Again, based on how the uniforms are, I'm not sure if there's any modification, anything that could be done to change those. So I'm not necessarily going to think that this would be an option. Of course, most times the boys wear long pants anyways. They could put on a sweater as well. The girls could perhaps even, wear long socks if they wanted to, and then wear sweaters. But that's not necessarily one of the best options, I don't think, in order for us to answer our questions. It says use mosquito repellent on skin and clothing. That's something that can be done at school, right? Because of course, not everybody at home can afford these. So if the school is able to have access to the repellents at school, the students can use it at school, and that would help them to prevent. So that for me is one of the options. change water in animal and pet containers. That's usually, we don't usually have pets at school, so that's not necessarily one of the options I would select for this one. All right, so there's 3 from here. There was 2 in that one. And so I have already prepared a sample, okay? But let us just go back to what the question says, make sure that we understand what we're supposed to be doing, and then I'll show you the sample letter that I have prepared. All right, so let's go back to what the letter says, right? So a letter, of course, you will make sure that you know the different parts of a letter. This type of letter is not a friendly letter. It's not a letter that you're going to be writing to your friend. But I would suggest that you just remember, at least try to remember the different parts of a letter and make sure that you include all those parts, okay? So you must have your address, right? Your address and the date, right? And then you can have the school's address and where the principal, you're addressing it to the principal, and the school address is necessary. You, of course, would have to have your greeting, or they call it salutation, okay? Dear principal, or if you know the name of the principal, which of course you should, then you could write that person's name in. Then, of course, you have the body of the letter where you pretty much would tell what your whole letter is about, explaining the 3 things that you would be wanting the school and the principal to, you know, along with the students, do at school to avoid getting dengue. And of course, remember, we highlighted the different possible evidence, right, from the sources. But remember, we have to put the details in our own words. And of course, it says be careful with your spelling, punctuation, grammar, so on. All right, so that would be in the body of course, the details. Then, of course, you would have your closing and, of course, your signature. So just remember the different parts of a letter. And if you need to do a quick check just to make sure, because, of course, you know the performance task, you may get a letter, you could get an essay. So you have to be sure that you're prepared for either one, okay? So I'm going to go now to showing you the sample document that I have prepared. Okay, it's just a draft. All right, so you would have to fill in your own details. Let me make it a little bigger. All right, so of course, the date, your address and the date, the principal's name, the school's name and address. All right, their principal, you go put the principal's name in. And again, this is just a sample of what you could write, okay? I hope this letter finds you well. I am writing to discuss the important issue of dengue prevention at our school. Dengue is a serious illness spread by mosquitoes, and it is crucial for us to take proactive steps to protect our students. Based on the information from 2 sources I reviewed, I would like to suggest 3 effective measures that we can implement at school to avoid getting dengue. All right, this is a very big paragraph that I put here at the beginning, but you don't necessarily need all this information, okay? But then again, some of you are very good writers, so it's possible that your writing could even surpass this, okay? So just make sure that the principal knows what you are about to talk about, all right? Just like you do an essay, you have to introduce what you're saying, okay? The whole importance of preventing dengue at school, all right? So just include that. It can't just be in a sentence or 2. It doesn't have to take this much as what I have here, all right? So don't be alarmed by, oh, is this how much I need to write? If you have this much to write, then you write it. If not, as long as you have your information clearly outlined and stated, then that's fine. All right, so firstly, so we're gonna go now get into the first point. Firstly, we should ensure that all water storage containers such as tanks and barrels are properly covered. According to source 1, uncovered water containers provide breeding grounds for mosquitoes. So by covering these containers, we can significantly reduce the mosquito population around our school. All right, so that was taken from source 1. We talk about the breeding sites and how to prevent that by covering the water containers. Then, secondly, source 2 mentions that using mosquito repellents can significantly decrease the risk of mosquito bites. The school could purchase or ask parents to donate repellents for students to use while at school. And lastly, it is essential to manage and dispose of items that can collect standing water, right? So source 2 emphasizes the importance of getting rid of old tires and containers where water can accumulate. These items should be disposed of or stored in a way that prevents water collection, thereby eliminating potential mosquito breeding sites. Again, guys, in your own words, okay? This just gives you an idea of how to state the source and how to write it in your own words and how to give the information that is required. All right, and then you end by saying, by following these guidelines, we can create a safer school environment and reduce the risk of dengue infection. Thank you for considering these recommendations. Sincerely, and of course, you put your signature, you put your name. You don't necessarily need a signature really, but you can put a signature and your name. All right, so there we have it, guys. Thank you for joining us again for another performance task paper. And if you have not yet done so, please subscribe to this channel, like this video, share with a friend, and as I always say, see you in the next video.